Why hello there, me and Dominic here have been expecting you. And the astute observator will notice that we are not in my workshop, we're actually inside my house in my office. And it's the place I probably spend the most amount of time. It's where I actually work, it's where I play, it's where I edit, it's where I record, it's where I design, and it's where I use things like my 3D printer. But it's a bit of a schmozzle, as you can see. There's no sense of organisation, things are just strewn all over the place. We don't have a lot of storage below, we don't have any storage above, and it's just not a very nice place to work. And it's gotten to a point where things are just all over the floor. So in what is likely to be a multiple video series, I'm going to start with building a brand new desk, some brand new cabinets, hopefully some overhead storage in the form of shelves or maybe cupboards, and maybe incorporate some other fancy design features. So join me and Dominic here for part 1, which is tackling the desk. Who's a good boy? You want to come build a desk with me? Our journey starts like any other, and that's by first selecting our timber. For this build, I'm going with these beautiful Tasmanian oak hardwood panels, which I picked up from my local Bunnings. At around 80 bucks a pop, they're not exactly budget friendly, but they are convenient. I did briefly float the idea of using formply to create a formply with hardware look desk, but I got the over my dead body look from my wife when I suggested it. So Tassie oak it is. On the bright side, these panels are already flat, square, and ready to go right out of the gate. So sometimes you've just got to roll with what you can get, especially if you want to live. While I could technically get my hands on some rough sawn timber, it would mean travelling quite a distance and figuring out how to haul it back home, which is a bit of a logistical challenge that's just not on the cards right now, unfortunately. So let's briefly talk about the design, and for it I've gone with something fairly simple, fairly clean. The desk will be made up of 3 core cabinets with a counter on the top, which at this stage is likely also going to be Tassie oak. Despite its simple appearance, this build will require me to tap into everything I've learned over the past 3 years. In this first part of the build, we'll focus on these 2 smaller cabinets to start with, as I think they will give us a good feel for the build overall. So my first job is to cut the panels to size over on the table saw. I'm going to have to be pretty precise here since I only have enough materials to make up these 2 cabinets and I have very little margin for error. Using digital methods like SketchUp during the design phase really does help in this initial planning process and reduces the error and waste when cutting. For the joinery, I'm going to be using my Fez tool domino. Now, every time I pull this tool out in a video, I feel like I have to go down this mandatory rabbit hole of justifying why I own one, and to remind everyone that there are plenty of ways to join 2 pieces of wood other than dominoes. At the end of the day, it's just a tool. Granted, it's a very expensive tool that only does one thing, but it happens to do that one thing exceptionally well. I saved for over a year to buy this, and to date it is still the most expensive tool purchase I've ever made in my short woodworking career, but it is not one that I regret one bit. There's a quote that always comes to mind that David over at Make Something once said: "Everybody is at a different stage within their woodworking journey. It is my job to inspire you, it is your job to take that inspiration and make it your own with what you have." Okay, enough of that. Back to the woodworking. The next job is to measure out where the dominoes are going to live. Each panel is going to receive 3 dominoes for good measure. 2 would probably be okay, but 3 make sure that the panels all behave and keep in alignment. The overhead power and dust collection boom arm I built a few videos ago has proven to be so incredibly useful to my workflow. Not having to dance around power cords and other tripping hazards has made the process that much easier. If you're interested in seeing that build, I'll link to the video in the description below. It's always good to do a dry fit before applying any glue. If there's going to be a problem, it's best that you find out now rather than later after you've already applied glue to your wood. Luckily, it looks like the careful planning has paid off and we got a really good fit. And when it comes to being square, you really can't get much better than this. With the successful dry fit, we can move on to the most stressful of things, the glue up. To help keep everything clamped and aligned while I'm assembling the cabinets, I'm going to be using some of these 3D printed Dana-made corner clamps. A little while back now, I teamed up with the one and only Mark Danes Dana, and we updated his digital corner clamp design with some of his great Danaisms. I'm particularly fond of the just get starting motto, as it's one of the key motivators that got me started on my own woodworking journey. If you're interested in purchasing some of your very own Dana-made corner clamps, then head on over to my website where there are a bunch of different designs and colours. If perhaps you'd prefer to print your own, then Dainsy will have a full set of digital files available from his website. I'll link to both in the description below. I let the glue dry overnight and came back the next morning for the next phase. While the cabinets are in this state, I'm going to give them a light sand first, especially along the edges where saw marks and other imperfections tend to hide. The adapter you see attached to my Bosch palm sander is a prototype right angle attachment I've been working on for a while. A few months ago I got my hands on a 3D printer, and since then I've been designing all kinds of solutions for problems I've encountered in the shop. And one of those was not having a right angle sanding attachment for my sander. Sanding at perfect 90 degrees to an edge, especially on a panel, can be tricky. It's easy to accidentally introduce a bevel or rounding without proper support. This adapter solves that by referencing the opposite surface, keeping the sander at a 90-degree angle. I've since upgraded to version 2 of the adapter, which now features removable attachments for different angles. Here you can see the 90-degree and 45-degree attachments. If you're interested in this adapter for your Bosch handheld sander, I'll be making the 3D printable files available on my website soon, so stay tuned. The last thing to do is clean up some of the small gaps created by sap. Sometimes you can just leave it as is, especially if they're not too bad, as they can be a nice feature, something that I did on the TV cabinet build I did a while back. But in this case, I'm going to repair them, and I'm going to do that with just a little bit of CA glue and some sanding. For many beginner woodworkers, and sometimes even professionals alike, building and installing drawers can feel like one of the most intimidating challenges. I remember when I first started that anything involving drawers felt overwhelming. I'd either avoid them entirely or skip the drawer slides altogether and just leave boxes sitting awkwardly in gaps. It wasn't elegant, but it was part of the learning process. The truth is, drawers can be intimidating because there doesn't seem to be a single correct way to make them. There are dozens of approaches and every woodworker seems to have their own preferred method. But that's also the beauty of it. There's room to experiment, adapt and find what works for you. My approach to drawers is rooted in practicality over perfection. It's not the easiest method, but it's also not the hardest, and it's a reliable way to build confidence while learning. The important thing is to embrace the challenge, knowing that every drawer you make, whether perfect or not, is a step forward on your woodworking journey. After cutting out the drawer sides and fronts, I move on to cutting rebates using a dado stack in the table saw. And then a rebate in each side to accept the bottom panel. For the bottom panel, I'm going to be using MDF, and it's probably the only non-hardwood that I'll use in the entire project. I plan on using a lining to hide the MDF, but I may also resort to installing drawer trays. I utilise these a lot in the shop to maximise storage, and I highly recommend it to anyone building a shop or craft space or anything to do with drawers. Well, we have our first mistake, and luckily it's not going to be a show-stopping mistake. So I've glued up two drawers, one here and one that I've just dry fitted into the cabinet, and they look good. They obviously need some cleanup, some sanding, etc. But other than that, they're nice and square, and they look really good. So I'm happy with the drawers. However, luckily I only did two yesterday, so I did this one and the one over there. When I was dry fitting it and just putting it in to see how it would fit, just make sure dimension looked all right, I noticed that it's sticking out the back by a good 20 millimeters. So if we look at the back, that's no good. Now, obviously we're going to close the end of this cabinet off, and we can't have a drawer sticking out like that. So I was trying to work out how I made this mistake, and when I look back at my drawings and I look back at my calculations that I ran here in order to get my drawer sizes, I realized what I've done is I normally, for this length here, I'll normally take this inner length here and this inner length here, and I'll subtract it from this, because obviously it makes the drawer longer. All right, so because of this bit here, so we need to subtract that. What I've done instead, and I don't know why I've done it, is I added it. So I've added nearly, I'll give or take 15 mil to the length of it, which obviously is way too long now, because that's why it's sticking out the back. Now, that's an easy fix for the other drawers, because all we need to do is cut these, we just need to trim the lengths off because we haven't put them together yet. But for these existing drawers, we're going to have to fix them. Now, luckily the fix is relatively straightforward, so all we're going to do is on the table saw, we will cut this off, this end off. So we'll make sure that this is the right length, and we'll cut this off, and that will reveal the end here. And we'll just need to make a couple new pieces like this, and those will go back into the new position. So relatively simple fix, annoying because obviously to make these, I need the dado stack, I need to do a lot of blade swap outs, and I need to make these exact, because otherwise they won't slot in exactly. However, that is the fix, and at least it's not going to waste too much material. We've obviously just lost the end part there. So I'm going to have to go ahead and do that now to fix that mistake. So I'm very fortunate that I didn't go ahead and just blind assemble all of the drawers. I'm very lucky with that, because obviously then I only have to do it for 2 and not all 8. So a quick trip over to the table saw to trim these 2 drawers down. Obviously, if you're going to make a mistake, it's always better to cut them too long than too short. But here's the thing, mistakes will happen, it's just part of the process, and how you handle them makes all the difference. Embracing your mistakes and learning from them will serve you well as you grow as a woodworker, so don't shy away from them, own them, adjust, and keep moving forward. With the drawers all fully assembled, it's time to get back to sanding. By this stage I'd upgraded to version 2 of my right angle adapter, and it's proving to be very useful. Now it's time to tackle the drawer slides. Being a visual person, I find it really helpful to map out their placement beforehand. Sometimes I'll mark it out by hand, but in this case I use SketchUp to measure and plan the exact locations. This extra step gives me a clear picture of the layout and makes the whole process much easier and much more accurate. Taking a moment to plan can save a lot of frustration later on, and it's always worth the time and effort. What I've cut here is a spacer out of a bit of scrap MDF. I'll use it to install the drawer slides, working from the top and cutting it as I go down. It just makes lining these up a lot easier and installing them pretty simple. That also helps that I can lay the cabinet on the side without having to fight gravity. When it comes to cabinets, I generally have two main requirements, or at least preferences. First, I'm not a fan of cupboards. In my experience, they mostly end up as black holes for stuff that you'll never touch or use again. And second, I generally like to avoid large, deep drawers for pretty much the same reason. They just become clutter magnets. Instead, I prefer shallow drawers. They encourage you to be intentional about what you store and keep everything more organized and accessible. It's a simple approach, but one that keeps your workspace more efficient and clutter-free. To install the drawers, I'm using my 3D printed cabinet shims, which I talked about in the last video. These shims have proven to be incredibly handy for this type of application and many others. And of course, if you're interested, I've made the 3D file available on my website, along with a very limited number of pre-printed shims. The process is straightforward. The drawer sits on the shims, which provides even spacing. With the drawer properly positioned, I can then attach it to the slides. Then I repeat this process, working my way up the cabinet. It's a simple yet effective method, and it saves a lot of hassle. And of course, we need the obligatory opening and closing of the drawers, just to show that, yeah, they do work. With the hardware dry fitted successfully, I remove all the drawers and hardware again to start applying the finish before working on the drawer fronts. The finish I'm using is new to me. It's a hard wax oil called Kunos by Livos. It comes highly recommended by Paul Jenkins, aka the Wood Knight, who has a fantastic video detailing why he loves this product and how to achieve great results with it. I've included a link in the video description if you're interested in learning more about this particular finish. To apply, I use a brush to spread it onto the drawer and then rub it into the grain with a disposable towel. I repeat this process for all the remaining drawers and cabinets, applying 3 coats in between drying. At this point, I'm going to pause the build because something has just occurred that I think is vitally important that I share with you. I think it's really important as content creators when something scary or something that was dangerous occurred, that we share that with you and use it as a means to educate and as well as remind people that this can sometimes be very dangerous and that we need to be vigilant in the workshop to make sure that we stay safe. We spend a lot of time talking about safety, especially around power tools, you know, things that have a blade, things that can cut us, things that have an immediate danger. But sometimes we forget that there are other things in the workshop that can cause harm as well. Often we don't really talk about things like solvents, like aerosols, like other finishes and varnishes and things like this that could potentially be flammable. And that's exactly what's just happened in the workshop here. I'm incredibly lucky that the title of this video is not "I'm standing in front of my burnt down workshop." For the cabinets and the drawers here, I've been using an oil-based finish, which is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using an oil-based finish. It's very, very common. And I applied it using nothing but a disposable sort of cloth. Now, yesterday I accumulated quite a few of these and I piled them to the side to get ready to dispose of them correctly. I placed that pile on top of my workbench stool, expecting to then dispose of them correctly. However, I got distracted. I left the shop and I forgot about them. When I returned, I discovered that the disposable wipes had combusted. They had caught on fire. Now, I'm extremely fortunate that the fire appears to have isolated itself just to the top of the seat. The only damage really done was to the seat itself. However, if I had placed those rags anywhere else in the shop, maybe on top of some wood or some other combustible sources, then this conversation could have been very different. So this is a friendly reminder that just because it doesn't have a blade doesn't mean it can't cause harm. And certainly solvents, finishes, varnishes, whatever it might be, can potentially also be hazards in the shop. Make sure you properly dispose of any rags or cloth that contains oil-based finishes. Either put them in a bucket with some water or put them in a metal container that you know is going to isolate any potential fire. Learn from my mistake, be vigilant, make sure that you do that cleanup and it's part of your normal ritual when you're using these type of solvents and these type of finishes. I was very lucky and fortunate that it was just the stool, but it could have easily have been the shop. So learn from my mistake and treat anything that could potentially be flammable in the same manner and light as you would any other power tool or any other thing that could cause harm to you. Okay, so with that, on with the build. For the drawer faces, I want the grain to flow seamlessly across both cabinets. Since I don't have a panel wide enough for this, I'll need to join two smaller panels to create one long continuous piece. And of course the easiest way to do this is to use the domino. This of course doesn't help with any sort of strength, but it certainly helps with keeping the panels aligned. After the panel was dry, I cut two sections for each of the cabinets, and then starting from the bottom, cut the first panel, eventually working my way up. I deliberately made the width of the drawer front wider than necessary so I could scribe in an exact fit. It was then a simple matter of just sneaking up to the line over at the table saw. Then attached the drawer front with some screws from the inside of the drawer, and I repeated the same process as I went up. Okay, we have all of our drawer fronts now on, nicely spaced. I've just glued a strip on the top here to cover the front part here, so that's just gone on now. That drawer is just sitting down there ready to go back in. Now you will have noticed these rebates that are in the front of the drawer fronts, or at the top of the drawer fronts I should say. If you're guessing that they are for the drawer handles, then that's correct. When I was hunting for drawer handles, I wanted something very minimal. I was looking for just something that would sort of sit on the top and just stick out the top here. Something in black or something like that. The drawer handles that I found were really expensive. We're talking about $20 or $30 per drawer handle, and I've got 4 on here, I've got 4 on the other one, and there's another 8 I think on another cabinet that I have to build for this desk. So it was going to get ridiculously expensive. So the alternative that I've come up with is to 3D print my own. So here's what I've got. This will slot into here and screw in from the top. And for some people it will be controversial. Well, maybe not controversial, but polarizing. Either you're gonna like this or hate the idea of having, plastic drawer fronts. Now, I've gone ahead and put it on cabinet number 1. So this cabinet is pretty much basically finished. Okay, so it has been finished applied to it. And as you can see, we've got the cabinet handles, and you'd be hard pressed to really tell that they are indeed plastic. So I 3D printed these ones, designed them myself. If we stand back, difficult to tell that they're actually plastic. You have to go up really, really close. And even then, we've set it at a very high print quality setting. They did take a long time to print, but they look really good in my opinion. So they just recess into the top of each of the drawers. And I think they look really good. Now you might be wondering, well, how did I go about making this recess? So did I sort of chisel it out one at a time? I did not. So again, we're leveraging technology here. And I made this rather complicated looking, but actually very, 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 very basic template. So this sits, or sat, on top of the drawer face. If you can see this properly, that sat on the drawer face, and then using a trim router bit, trims out the exact gap that I needed to put the drawer front, or drawer handles on, sorry. So that worked out really well. So we're basically on the home stretch now. I'm going to put these as soon as this is dried, I'm going to put the drawer handles on, and we'll put some finish. Now, before I get into all of that, I almost forgot to mention the feet, which, surprise surprise, are also 3D printed. I want these cabinets to have a floating appearance, so these low profile feet will be positioned far enough underneath to hopefully create that effect. In the end, this might not have been my most exciting project I've shared with you, but for me it represents one of the most meaningful. Projects like this are milestones in my woodworking journey, a reflection of how far I've come and a reminder of what's possible, even in the relatively short time I've been pursuing this craft. I hope my story and journey have served as proof that anyone can start their woodworking adventure. All it takes is that first step. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who supported me this year, whether by liking, subscribing, or becoming a channel member. I want to give a very special shout out to my newest channel member, Matt Doldry. Welcome to the paddock, and thank you so much for your support. So wishing everyone a very Merry Christmas, and I hope to see you in the new year as I continue this desk build and many other exciting workshop projects.